Hey everyone, welcome back to AI Insights. I'm your host for today, Fleur Prince, and I'm here together with Dr. Chelle Meadows, where she's going to talk a bit more about her career, what she does, and also how this helps for you as one of our listeners for your career in AI and how to stay up to date. So, Dr. Chelle, it's so nice to meet you. Welcome
Hi,
on the
nice
show.
to meet you. I always say, you can call me anything, just don't call me late for dinner.
I mean, food is always important, right?
Right. Okay, so my name is Dr. Shelley. I have a bachelor's degree in law and policy, 2 master's degrees. One is in marketing, one is in supply chain logistics. And in 2025, I completed my PhD in business leadership, primarily focusing on artificial intelligence and governance.
Awesome. So, how did you actually end up in this field? I'm just very curious, just in general. College and just choosing a certain.
Well, I've always had projects that involved some sort of productivity improvement component to them. So for the past 30 years, I've worked in different industries and in different roles, right? You start at an entry level role and you work your way up. And no matter where I worked, I naturally gravitated towards those projects that were important for either performance, efficiency, or profitability. And when AI came out in 2023, I saw it as just another tool in my tool belt to help with developing efficient workflows and processes, kind of like Lean Six Sigma when that came out, right? Or Kaizen and the other total quality management tools that we use today. So when AI came out, I looked at it as this is an extraordinary opportunity to improve how organizations operate, make decisions, expand human capability. But the focus on governance, I kind of blame that on the pre-law, studies. It made me much more aware of how governance is so important to help organizations realize that potential that AI comes or provides is very dependent on, think of it as a GPS, right? Governance is GPS to provide direction, establish the route, help us adjust when conditions change. It even tells us when we need to reroute or backtrack, right? That's how I look at governance with AI. And so before I did my dissertation, while I was doing my master's, I was starting to dabble a little bit with AI, specifically the generative large language models. And I just thought it was fascinating. Like, wow, this is so game changing because it can help you really speed up administrative or quality control tasks. But everybody on the news was talking about AI so negatively. They didn't seem to see its potential. And so that's why I
We're like,
describe
I don't agree with this.
Yeah, I'm a chief optimist of AI, right?
Mhm.
But I'm not a naive chief optimist. And so I started writing about almost a governance approach on how to look at AI from a workflow improvement process instead of as a tool for its own sake. Okay. And that's when I wrote my first book, From Data to Decisions. It talks about things like, how do you create an AI council? What is meant by this terminology that's getting tossed around? I mean, everybody was talking about LLMs and machine learning and computer vision, but these were new terms, right? Historically, large scale technological improvements, let's think of the internet, right? Or even computers themselves, they were introduced to large corporations, the government, universities. So they had the ability to parse the capabilities and then educate consumers. AI was totally different, right? It showed up on our smartphones. It showed up in our computers and suddenly it was there. So you had CEOs and frontline workers suddenly in the student seat learning a new technology at the same time.
Exactly. This is not something you needed a 3-year PhD for, but it was suddenly just there. Everyone had to figure out, okay, what do I do with this technology?
Right. And so when I did my PhD and my doctoral studies, I focused primarily on AI because I was fascinated by it. I use it professionally. I use it personally. And based on the research and what everybody was telling us in the peer-reviewed articles that you have to go through, right, as part of being
Yeah.
a doctoral student. They all were saying that the reason that artificial intelligence implementations were failing was because there wasn't a standardized framework. So I had this little goal of coming up with a standardized framework that everybody could use as the culmination of my dissertation, right? I'm like, okay, everybody in the research says we need a framework. I'm going to interview and survey. So I did a mixed methods approach and find out exactly what our framework needs to make artificial intelligence implementation successful in a responsible way.
Yes.
And my research fell flat on its face. First off, it's just kind of funny, but I had 58 respondents to the survey that said they were using a standardized framework. And I kind of had that in there as a trick question. What type of framework are you using? Standardized, organization specific, or none? And I really thought I wouldn't get any standardized responses because there isn't a standardized framework that's accepted worldwide or even within our own country, right? There just
No.
isn't. Everybody's kind of trying their own thing. And so when I had 58 people saying, or 58 respondents saying that they were using a standardized framework, I already knew we had a problem, right? But the bigger lesson that made me, I guess, postgraduate pivot was that regardless of the framework that people were using, whether they thought it was a standardized framework, whether it was something that the company had developed internally, or they weren't using a framework at all, it really came down to leadership and governance. And there's this huge chasm between the two. I interviewed 4 different categories of professionals. I interviewed, obviously, the C-suite. I interviewed IT people. I tried to interview regulation and compliance. And then I interviewed what I consider the frontline workers. And there was a huge disconnect between those roles, even within the same company, about what was being done from a governance perspective. And it really showed that there was a case of, we had a childhood game down here called Kick the Can, right? Where everybody's kind of kicking the can to somebody else. They're saying, well, it's the company that we hired to help us develop our AI tools. They're responsible for it. Or legal is saying, well, it's not a compliance thing because we're following the contract.
This is also, by the way, pertain to the salient message on your LinkedIn where where you say AI isn't the problem, the alignment is.
Correct. That's what culminated into that, because it really was an issue of alignment between frontline workers and other members of the team. The problem is where decisions are being influenced and are people thinking them through.
No, exactly. Did you, by the way, then also notice it depended on also to which kind of people you were talking to? Because I can, for example, imagine that when you're talking to politicians compared to someone who works for the government or someone who's a developer, that they all look different at this problem as well.
Exactly. There is a very different perspective. And there isn't a common language for the regulatory or legislative perspective of it. So when I wrote my book, I specifically chose the EU AI Act to come up with the definition for what I meant even by artificial intelligence, because we don't even have a universal acceptance of what artificial intelligence is, okay? And one of the things that's really important is to make sure that you're talking about the same thing and meaning the same thing whenever you're discussing AI. So when I talk to some people about AI and governance, they're like, oh yeah, I'm fine. We gave our employees access to ChatGPT. We don't have to do anything because it's taken care of in that vendor portal. And I use ChatGPT because it's one of the most popular ones, but this isn't a problem just for ChatGPT. The issue comes down to, okay, well, when you gave your employees that access, did you talk to them about what they should and should not upload? Did you talk to them about what questions they should or should not ask? And then post the court ruling, did you talk to them about what's logged and retained versus what's not?
And this is something you're also covering in your books because you already talked about that you released 2 books. Are you also working on a third, by the way? I'm just
am. It's AI Risky Business. But I'm a chief optimist, right? And so the premise is not that AI is inherently risky, right? It's that different decisions require different levels of risk, and that governance needs to be made at those levels. And so I talk about where in that decision process is the risk. And I talk about the difference between human in the loop, right? I think we could argue in the scenario we just talked through that accounting clerk was a human in the loop. She had the ability to look at it and see it, but did she have the ability to say, hey, these numbers are wrong, we shouldn't use this, or it needs more testing, or we need to change something in our process, right? That would be human in command. Human in command has the ability it is empowered without fear of recrimination to raise their hand and say, there's a problem here and we need to stop. Right?
Talking here about having the courage to make the decision, to raise your hand and saying, I think there's something wrong. Or
think about it this way. And it's kind of nuanced. So the company says you have the ability to raise your hand and you will not be penalized if you say something's wrong with these outputs and we need to stop, either depending on them. So instead of depending on this output every time, I'm going to take the extra 5 minutes to validate and correct the output instead of just copying it and passing it on. Let's say I'm a claims processor and I upload all the documents in the claim and it gives me a summary with a proposed recommendation. Okay. And you've got employee A who maybe checked for the first 5 to 10 claim summaries and then decided, you know what, it's always right, so I'm just going to copy and paste it and move on. Versus an employee that's not comfortable with AI, maybe has some fear about it taking over her job and wants to make sure it's accurate. She spends an extra 5 minutes on every claim, every time, making sure that the output is correct. Okay. 6 months later, employee A gets promoted because they've processed more claims. They're being efficient. They've adopted this new technology. They're doing a great job. Versus the employee who's maybe slower and more accurate because she's not just accepting the output, she's validating it. Either one of them could raise their hand and stop the system, but the system is rewarding the one that doesn't.
Yeah, the ones that's most efficient.
Right. And so it's not just being empowered to raise your hand, it's also having a culture that recognizes, hey, there's a problem here, and it's okay to say we need to fix this. Because what's going to happen is that at some point, for whatever reason, it could be because of a model change, it could be because of an update, it could be because of some information that the tool didn't know what to do with. They're going to process a claim wrong. And that's going to lead to a lawsuit. And then the question's going to be, okay, can you backtrace and document every decision along that chain 6 months later?
So are you also seeing then that there's a difference now happening? So the last few years, we're really seeing the trend coming up from like disruption, so disrupting the industry, to now going more towards, well, like you said, validating, adhering to the taste of the company instead of just being more efficient. Are you seeing that trend change?
Efficiency and profitability is still a primary goal for why people are investing it. I think we're starting to see the shine come off of it. Okay. The first 3 years, everybody was super, super excited about it. This is great. This is amazing. It's making us more profitable. It makes us more efficient. But it comes down to the culture of the company, right? Company A, and I'm going to pick on Amazon because they made it very clear, very boldly that they were going to cut their headcount. They were using AI to find a way to cut their headcount. Okay. That's how they were looking at profitability, right? But there's other companies out there that are saying, we're not using AI to cut our headcount as blatantly and openly and directly as that. What we're doing is we're using AI to increase our productivity, the scope of projects we can do. And as somebody retires, we may selectively choose not to replace that person, right? Both are achieving profitability metrics, but they're doing it in very different ways.
You're seeing like a lot of engineers across the board are being fired for being like, oh, we now have agents that can code in your place, so we'll let you go. But now that you're actually seeing the problem is that if only one engineer stays behind and the agent makes a mistake, there's no one else to fix it except maybe that one engineer who doesn't have the knowledge around that system.
Well, and here's a bigger concern. We're building entire enterprise systems that are dependent on this technology. Okay. I don't know about you, but I've had ChatGPT go down at the worst possible times. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Come back, come back, come back. Okay. Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then you switch to a different model or you do something different. Okay. There's entire organizations out there that look at what they call enterprise risk and they prepare for calamitous events. Okay. Like when COVID hit. Okay. None of us ever thought about COVID, but somewhere in somebody's binder was a plan that, hey, if there's a pandemic and our workforce can't come into the office, what do we do? Like they had that somewhere in a binder and a page as a potential scenario, and they knew what to do when they had to shut down their offices. They were the ones that were the fastest at getting their employees reset up as remote workers and reconfigured things so that they could keep working. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone who focuses on the supply chain and making sure that it keeps going, even if a tsunami hits a country, for example.
And that's a normal part of enterprise risk. But are people looking at the fact that you've now got LLMs and agents embedded in your workflow? What happens if there's a brownout for 3 days and you lose your electric? All of a sudden, your workflow processes are going to stop because they're all based on electricity and the ability for data to move without people. How long is it going to be before you're like, okay, we have to kind of do this snail mail, or we have to somehow shuffle this to an office across the country that has power, or right? There's that knowledge. Okay, well, maybe that company or affiliate that's across the country, they'd never done, I don't know, the accounting functions. Okay. Because that was always managed on the West Coast, and now you're shuttling it to somebody on the East Coast. They've never done it. What are you going to do? Fly your West Coast employees to the East Coast to do it? And are they even going to know how to reset that up and get it going again? You know, thankfully everything's in the cloud, right?
Yeah, but what if the data center where the cloud is stored?
Well, except what happens when there's a problem with the cloud? We've seen that with what? Cloudflare, CrowdSpray?
Yeah, when the entire airport just shut down because of one mistake.
Right. And so part of the risk of AI is we are becoming dependent on that technology. If you're cutting your workforce, you're losing that knowledge base. What happens if for some reason that technology is not available?
It's a good question. I think it's also good closing for the final question. So you've posted on LinkedIn about the path to 2030. What do you hope to see in AI governance by 2030? Or like, what's your ideal pathway that look?
You saw my articles kind of picking apart that video and identifying what I see were some of the flaws. I think we're going to see more litigation and lawsuits involving breaches, involving issues. I think we're going to have what I call a Toyota moment where some disruptor is going to come in with a better, faster tool. We saw DeepSeek try to do that already, but it had its own political issues. We're going to find somebody's going to come up with a better, faster one that's going to disrupt it.
We're even seeing people training their own models now. If once you can actually download a simple model from Hugging Face, people are doing it themselves. They don't need to use Claude or OpenAI or anymore, as long as you have a computer.
But that's what I mean. That's why litigation is going to come into play, because Hugging Face was already breached in a capture the flag testing scenario. There was already a breach, right? And these are the companies that are supposed to be setting the standards for enterprise and corporations. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we're definitely going to be seeing more litigation beyond the idiotic attorneys that are putting in fake citations, right? We're seeing some of that beyond the copyright questions, right? I think it's going to start getting into the breaches. It's going to start getting into contract, issues. And from a technology perspective, I think we're going to see it slow down as companies start to realize, either through risk assessments or enterprise risk or through something happening that directly impacted their business, they're going to start slowing down and saying, okay, wait a minute. we need to change some of this. At the same time, I think agentic is going to increase, right? They might slow down on some of it, but I think the temptation of using agents is so big because it can be so impactful that we're going to see more of that. I don't think we're going to get to artificial general intelligence by 2030. I just don't see it happening with statistical modeling. I'm sorry. I just can't make that leap. Anything that's using AGI as its assumptive base for future technology, I think right now is really a pipe dream. Right? It's something that we might want to have happen. You know, we all grew up with the Jetsons. We all want that robotic house cleaner, right? I have a cordless robotic pool cleaner. If you want to map where my pool is, I don't care. That's low risk. Okay. You're mapping where my pool is. You're mapping the path that you cleaned the last time you were in it. And your little computer vision camera is telling you where the leaves are that you need to pick up. Okay. But I made that as an informed decision, as a conscientious consumer. What was I willing to do or not do? What was I willing to have or not have? Right. But I think that we need to educate those decisions and educate people to think of them. I don't know about in Europe, but here in the United States, my Facebook is getting flooded with those recording devices. Have this necklace, have this thing on the back of your phone. Never
Have an
miss
AI friend.
Right. Never miss meeting notes again. Right. It sounds amazing. Okay. But let's look at this from a decision perspective. It's passive, not active. So it's listening passively. And it doesn't do anything with the information. It just transcribes it. Okay? Well, except technically, because it's recording, that's considered wiretapping. Are these devices in compliant with state and federal wiretapping and recording laws that sometimes require two-party consent?
No, it's the same thing in Europe as well. You need permission from the other party to record them. You're not allowed otherwise to record.
Right? So, but you're wearing a necklace. They may or may not know it's a recorder. Okay. Let's take that governance question even further. You're getting mugged. It's recording you getting mugged and screaming for help. But remember, it's a passive recorder. It's not going to call 911 or whatever the European
version. Yeah, I think we have Pocket here.
I don't know, but it's not going to call. It's not going to get you help. And that recording of that mugging most likely won't be allowed to be used in a court of law because it doesn't meet the evidentiary requirements to be submitted as an exhibit. Okay, so now you've got those questions about it. And then there's the whole thing about the data it's recording and transcribing. Where is that? Where is it saved at? How long is it retained for? Who else has access to it? Are they selling that data? Right? So you've got all of these questions that are decision point questions about a little device that records passively.
No, exactly. And I think this is coming up a lot around, Europe, America, but also around the world, indeed, where the law is, you need two-party consent for this. And I'm very curious to see where this will go as well.
Yeah, but people are buying it. They're not thinking about that governance.
Do you think pretty much AI literacy is also going to play an important part for up to 2030?
It has to. It has to come apace with it. But even people that work in risk as a profession, on a coffee shop, it's on their surveillance camera where they're recording how many sales an employee makes and how long customers are sitting on there. I talk about it, and I have it on one of my articles. I talk about the coffee shop scenario. And so I showed that to a team of risk professionals. And I said, okay, what are the governance issues you see here? Now, the first thing that they thought of being in the risk field was cybersecurity. Okay. But then I'm sitting there going, okay, well, they're capturing biometric data. Is that allowed? How is the cup count increasing? Is it increasing as I fill the cup? Does it increase as I pass the cup over a certain threshold? Or does it go as the customer grabs the cup? Why are we using a security system to capture that data if a point of sale system can capture that data? right? There were all of these, I think I came up with like 10 different governance questions. Okay. And they were like, wow. I mean, it went everything from how long is the data kept? Did the employees know they were being tracked? Like all sorts of things. And one of the professionals went to a game where they had an AI camera. They advertised, we have this AI camera, and he'd seen it in the past and thought, oh, isn't that cute? Look at that. They're putting funny faces on kids in the crowd. Right. But after we looked at that coffee cup scenario or that coffee shop scenario, he went to another game, saw that AI camera, and had a totally different perspective. When was permission granted? What's the retention? These are minors that they're capturing videos of. What laws are those violating? Are they capturing any biometric data as a part of taking that picture? Right? Like, all of a sudden, something that he thought was cute and simple and harmless, he's now aware of the underlying governance questions that are a part of that. That's the type of literacy. I wouldn't say it's AI literacy. I would say it's governance literacy that we need to start teaching.
I think it's also a good closing thought as well for this podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Chelle, for being on our podcast. It was really awesome having you. To everyone, I will link her books in our newsletter and our posts, so you can also have a look at them. And also keep a lookout for her third book once it's released. And thank you so much for everyone for listening. And once again, Dr. Chelle, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.
All right, to everyone else, don't forget to subscribe, like, and also leave us a comment if you have a very cool guest that you want us to interview next time. Hey, bye-bye!